My name is Rachel, and I'm about to tell you how my college roommate spent 20 years systematically destroying my life because she couldn't accept that I had found success she believed should have been hers. What I thought was a series of unfortunate coincidences turned out to be the most calculated, long term betrayal I could have ever imagined. One that nearly cost me everything I'd worked for. I should have known something was wrong when my former roommate Amanda seemed so excited about our 20-year college reunion. For 2 decades, Amanda had maintained what I thought was a genuine friendship, staying in touch through social media, occasional coffee dates, and holiday cards. She'd been there through my divorce, celebrated my career milestones, and seemed genuinely supportive of my journey from struggling graduate student to successful marketing executive. But Amanda volunteering to help organize our reunion? That should have been my first red flag. Oh, Rachel, you know I have so many connections from all my networking events, she'd said with that practiced smile she'd perfected in her corporate communications job. Plus, I know where everyone ended up. I can get us a great turnout and make sure all the right people are there. The comment felt a little off, but I was grateful for her enthusiasm. College had been a difficult time for me. I'd struggled financially, worked multiple part-time jobs, and barely scraped by while my classmates seemed to effortlessly enjoy the full college experience. Amanda had been my anchor during those years, the friend who helped me navigate social situations and included me in group activities when I felt like an outsider. When I graduated and started my marketing career, I'd worked twice as hard as my colleagues to prove myself. I'd built my reputation through genuine talent, innovation, and relentless dedication. Now, at 42, I was a senior vice president at one of the city's most prestigious agencies, owned a beautiful home, and had finally found the success that had seemed impossible during those struggling college years. For the first time in my life, I was actually looking forward to a reunion. I was excited to show my former classmates that the girl who'd worn thrift store clothes and eaten ramen noodles had made something of herself. I was so naive. The reunion planning started innocently enough. Amanda insisted on handling most of the logistics: venue booking, catering, entertainment, and guest communications. At first, I was grateful for her organizational skills and social connections. She seemed to know everyone's contact information and current status, and she was enthusiastic about creating a memorable event. Rachel deserves to see how amazing everyone turned out, she'd tell other planning committee members, her charm turned up to maximum. This is going to be such a wonderful celebration of how far we've all come. But slowly, things started to feel strange. When we discussed the reunion booklet, Amanda spent considerable time talking about her own achievements and seemed less interested in highlighting other people's successes. When we planned the networking mixer, she made sure it was scheduled at a time when I'd be traveling for work and couldn't attend. When we organized the memorial segment for deceased classmates, she somehow forgot to include Tom Morrison, who had been one of my closest friends before he died in a car accident 5 years ago. The first real red flag came when I was reviewing the guest list. Amanda, I said, looking at the names, I notice you didn't invite Katie Henderson or Mark Roberts. They were both pretty involved in our class activities. Amanda's expression flickered for just a moment. Oh, I couldn't find current contact information for them. You know how some people just disappear after college. But that didn't make sense. Katie was a successful attorney whose firm had a prominent website, and Mark was a professor at the state university whose information was easily accessible online. It would have taken 5 minutes to find either of them. I can get their information, I offered. Katie and I connected on LinkedIn a few years ago. That's okay, Amanda said quickly. The venue has capacity limits anyway. We can't invite everyone. But the venue she'd chosen could easily accommodate 50 more people. Something wasn't adding up. That night, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I reached out to Katie on LinkedIn, mentioning the upcoming reunion. Her response shocked me. Reunion? I never heard about any reunion. I would have loved to attend. I've been wondering why I never hear from anyone from our class anymore. I felt a chill run down my spine. Katie hadn't been excluded by accident. She'd been deliberately left out. But why? Over the next few days, I reached out to several other classmates I remembered fondly. The responses were consistently disturbing. None of them had heard about the reunion. More troubling, several mentioned that they'd tried to reconnect with classmates over the years, but had been told by mutual friends that I wasn't interested in staying in touch, or that I thought I was too good for my old college friends now. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were starting to come together. I called Mark Roberts, the professor Amanda claimed she couldn't find. Not only was he easy to reach, but he had a story that made my blood run cold. Rachel, I'm so glad you called, he said warmly. I've been wanting to reconnect for years, but every time I tried to get your contact information through mutual friends, I was told you preferred to keep your college life separate from your professional life. Who told you that? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Amanda Stevens. She said you two stayed close, and that you'd specifically asked her not to give out your information because you were trying to maintain professional boundaries. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. Amanda hadn't just excluded people from the reunion. She'd been actively preventing them from reconnecting with me for years. She'd positioned herself as the gatekeeper to my life, controlling who could and couldn't reach me. But why? What could she possibly gain from isolating me from my college friends? The answer came when I started digging deeper into Amanda's social media history and professional background. What I found was a pattern of deception and manipulation that spanned 2 decades. Amanda had been systematically taking credit for my ideas, sabotaging my professional relationships, and spreading subtle lies about my character to mutual contacts. She'd used her position as my closest college friend to gain credibility, then leveraged that credibility to undermine me in ways so subtle that I'd never noticed. The evidence was overwhelming once I knew what to look for. In 2005, when I developed an innovative social media marketing campaign for a major client. Amanda had somehow obtained details about my strategy and pitched a nearly identical concept to her own company's client just days before my presentation. My client ended up choosing a different direction, claiming the approach wasn't original enough. In 2008, when I was up for a promotion at my agency, Amanda had reached out to my boss under the guise of providing a reference for me. According to LinkedIn messages I found, she described me as talented but sometimes difficult to work with and suggested that I might not be ready for senior leadership responsibilities. In 2012, when I was dating David, a man I'd met through mutual friends, Amanda had befriended him on social media and began sharing concerns about my emotional stability following my divorce. David had broken up with me abruptly, saying he needed to focus on himself, but I later discovered through mutual friends that Amanda had convinced him I was still too damaged for my marriage to be in a healthy relationship. The pattern continued year after year. Every time I had a professional opportunity, a potential relationship, or a chance to expand my social circle, Amanda was there, not supporting me, but subtly undermining me while maintaining the facade of friendship. But the most devastating discovery came when I found an old email thread from 2019. I'd been contacted by a headhunter about a dream job. Creative director at an innovative startup that was exactly aligned with my skills and interests. The interview process had gone exceptionally well, and I'd been told I was the top candidate. Then, suddenly, I was informed that they'd decided to go in a different direction and hired someone with a better cultural fit. In the email thread I found, Amanda had connected with the startup CEO on LinkedIn, claiming to be a longtime friend and colleague who could provide insight into my professional reputation. She described me as incredibly talented, but sometimes unreliable under pressure, and mentioned that I had a history of job hopping that might indicate commitment issues. None of it was true, but coming from someone who presented herself as my close friend and professional contact, it had been enough to cost me the opportunity. The job had gone to Amanda herself. She'd applied for the same position, used her inside knowledge about my interview process to tailor her own application, and then sabotaged my candidacy to improve her own chances. The longtime friend providing a reference was actually a competitor eliminating her competition that I felt sick. For 20 years, I'd thought Amanda was my friend. In reality, she'd been my most dedicated enemy, systematically destroying opportunities while positioning herself to benefit from my failures. But why? What had driven her to spend 2 decades of her life focused on undermining mine? The answer became clear when I looked at the reunion guest list more carefully. Amanda had invited a very specific subset of our college class, people who remembered her as successful and popular, while excluding anyone who might remember her differently. In college, Amanda had presented herself as the confident, well-connected one while I'd been the struggling, insecure one. But the reality was more complex. Amanda had been deeply insecure, constantly comparing herself to others and desperately seeking validation. My success threatened the narrative she'd built about herself and our college dynamic. She needed me to fail, so she could continue being the successful one. She needed our college friends to remember her as the one who made it, while I remained the struggling girl from our dorm room. The reunion was supposed to be her victory lap, a chance to show everyone how much better her life had turned out compared to mine. Except my life had actually turned out quite well. Despite her best efforts to sabotage it, I spent the next 2 weeks gathering evidence and preparing for what I knew would be the most important confrontation of my life. I wasn't going to let Amanda control the narrative anymore. The night of the reunion, I arrived early and mingled with classmates I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was wonderful reconnecting with people, but I noticed something troubling. Several people seemed surprised to see me, mentioning that they'd heard I wasn't coming, or that Amanda had told them I preferred smaller gatherings these days. Even at the reunion itself, Amanda was trying to manage people's perceptions of me. During the cocktail hour, I watched Amanda work the room like a political candidate, positioning herself as the social connector who'd kept everyone together over the years. She told story after story about her professional successes, her networking abilities, and her role in organizing the reunion, but I also noticed something else. Several classmates approached me privately to express surprise about seeing me there, mentioning that they'd tried to reach out over the years, but had been told I wasn't interested in maintaining college friendships. "Amanda said you'd moved on from your college days," said Jenny Martinez, who'd been in several of my classes. "She made it sound like you thought you were too good for us now." The pattern was becoming undeniable. Amanda hadn't just isolated me from individual people, she'd systematically poisoned the well of all my college relationships, ensuring that if anyone tried to reconnect with me, they'd be discouraged by her lies. The evening reached its climax during the speeches portion of the program. Amanda had positioned herself as the master of ceremonies, and when she took the microphone, she was radiant, confident, charming, commanding the room's attention. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice warm and engaging. "I'm Amanda Stevens, and I have the honor of welcoming you to our 20-year reunion." The crowd settled in to listen, expecting the usual nostalgic anecdotes and well wishes. Looking around this room, "I'm so proud of how far we've all come," Amanda continued. "I've had the privilege of staying connected with many of you over the years, helping to maintain the bonds we formed during those formative college days." I felt a familiar chill. This wasn't sounding like a typical reunion speech. "In fact," Amanda said, her smile becoming more pronounced, "I've been thinking a lot about the relationships we built in college and how they've shaped our adult lives. Some of us have remained close, supporting each other through career challenges and personal growth." She was building towards something, and I had a sinking feeling I knew what it was. "Others," Amanda continued, her voice taking on a subtly different tone, "have chosen different paths. They've moved on from their college friendships, perhaps feeling that their success means they no longer need the support system that helped them get started." The room grew quieter, sensing an undercurrent of tension. It makes me sad when I think about classmates who've become too busy or too important to maintain the relationships that once meant so much to them. People who've forgotten where they came from and who helped them along the way. I realized with horror that Amanda was using her reunion speech to publicly shame me for supposedly abandoning my college friendships. Friendships that she had systematically destroyed behind my back, but I was ready for this moment. I stood up slowly, and all eyes in the room turned to me. Amanda's expression flickered with surprise and something that looked like fear. "Amanda," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "that's an interesting perspective on maintaining college friendships. I'd like to share a different story." I walked to the front of the room, and Amanda reluctantly handed me the microphone, clearly unable to refuse without causing a scene. "My name is Rachel Thompson, and I want to talk about what it really means to maintain friendships over 20 years. I began, and I pulled out my phone and opened a prepared presentation. "This is an email from 2019, I said, holding up the phone so people could see the screen. In it, Amanda contacted my potential employer, identifying herself as my close friend and colleague, and provided a reference that cost me a job opportunity. I scrolled to the next screenshot. This is a LinkedIn message from 2008, where Amanda contacted my boss to provide insight about my readiness for promotion, describing me as difficult to work with. The room was dead silent now, everyone staring at the evidence I was presenting. "And this," I continued, showing another screenshot, "is a Facebook message from 2012 where Amanda contacted a man I was dating to share concerns about my emotional stability." Amanda's face had gone white. "Rachel, you're taking those completely out of context, am I?" I interrupted. "Let me provide some more context then." I turned to address the room directly. "How many of you tried to reach out to me over the years, but were told I wasn't interested in maintaining college friendships?" About a dozen hands went up around the room. "And how many of you were told that I thought I was too good for my old college friends?" More hands went up, and the murmuring in the room grew louder. "Jenny," I said, looking directly at one of my former classmates, "you mentioned earlier that you tried to contact me, but were discouraged. Who told you I wasn't interested?" "Amanda did," Jenny said quietly, her voice carrying in the silent room. "Mark," I continued, looking at another classmate, "you said you wanted to reconnect, but were told I preferred to keep my college life separate from my professional life. Who told you that?" "Amanda," Mark replied, understanding dawning on his face. The room was buzzing now with shocked whispers. People were beginning to realize the scope of what had been happening. "For 20 years," I said, my voice growing stronger, "Amanda has positioned herself as the gatekeeper to my life. She's prevented old friends from reconnecting with me, sabotaged my professional opportunities, and interfered with my personal relationships, all while maintaining the facade of being my closest friend." I pulled up one final piece of evidence, a screenshot of Amanda's recent job application for the position I'd been denied. "This is Amanda's application for the creative director position at Innovate Marketing," I announced. "The same position I interviewed for in 2019. The same position I was denied after Amanda provided a reference, questioning my reliability and commitment." The room erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs. "Amanda didn't just sabotage my candidacy," I continued. "She eliminated her competition and then took the job for herself." Amanda looked around the room, seeing the disgust and betrayal on every face, and something broke inside her. The mask of friendship and success she'd worn for 20 years finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," she said, her voice desperate and shrill. "Rachel was supposed to be the struggling one. She was supposed to need my help. But everything came so easily to her. The promotions, the recognition, the opportunities one deserved. The admission hung in the air like poison. I worked just as hard as she did," Amanda continued, seeming unable to stop the words from pouring out. "But she always got the credit, always got the opportunities. It wasn't fair. I was the one with the connections, the social skills, the networking abilities. I was supposed to be the successful one. She was crying now, ugly tears that ruined her perfect makeup. I just wanted to level the playing field, she whispered. I wanted her to need me the way she did in college. I wanted to be important to someone's success instead of always being overshadowed. The room was silent except for Amanda's sobs. Despite everything she'd done, I felt a stab of pity for my former friend. Her whole identity had been built on being superior to me, and when that foundation cracked, she'd spent 20 years trying to tear me down instead of building herself up. But pity wasn't the same as forgiveness. Amanda, I said gently, you need help. Professional help. And you need to stop making other people's success about your own insecurity. She looked up at me, mascara streaming down her face, and for a moment she looked like the insecure college girl she'd always been, before the networking, before the manipulation, before the need to control everyone else's narrative had poisoned her life. Rachel, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, I said sadly. You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just didn't expect to get caught. Several classmates approached Amanda, expressing their disgust and disappointment. Others came to me, apologizing for believing her lies and expressing regret about the years of lost connection. The reunion continued, but the mood was subdued, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. Many people exchanged real contact information, determined to rebuild the connections that Amanda had severed. Later that night, in my hotel room, I finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. My phone was buzzing with messages from classmates who wanted to reconnect, colleagues who'd heard about the confrontation through social media, and friends who were shocked to learn about Amanda's 20-year campaign of sabotage. But mixed in with the support was a text from Amanda. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm checking into a therapy program tomorrow morning. I can't live with what I've become. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Amanda face the consequences of her actions without any compassion from me. But another part of me recognized the broken person behind the manipulation that I typed back. I hope you find the help you need. But Amanda, you need to understand that some relationships can't be repaired. What you did wasn't just about me. You hurt everyone who tried to maintain friendships through you. She responded immediately, I know. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends to everyone I hurt. I just wanted you to know that your success was never about me. You earned everything you achieved, despite my best efforts to stop you. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement that the person I'd thought was my friend had never really existed. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Several of my former classmates reached out to mutual professional contacts, correcting misinformation that Amanda had spread over the years. My current employer, learning about the sabotage attempts, offered me additional support and resources for a promotion I'd been considering. Most importantly, I reconnected with college friends I'd thought had forgotten about me. We formed a group chat, planned regular get-togethers, and began rebuilding the relationships that Amanda had destroyed. 6 months later, I received a letter from Amanda. She'd completed an intensive therapy program and was working with a counselor who specialized in narcissistic behavior patterns. The letter was a detailed apology that acknowledged specific ways she'd hurt me and others, along with a commitment to continue therapy and make direct amends where possible. I read the letter twice, then put it away without responding. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have a conversation with her, but that day wasn't today. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal quickly, especially when they revealed decades of calculated deception. A year later, I was scrolling through LinkedIn when I saw a post from Amanda. She was working at a nonprofit organization, helping people recover from various forms of manipulation and abuse. The post was about her own journey in therapy and her commitment to using her experience to help others. For the first time since the reunion, I felt something other than anger toward Amanda. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of examining their behavior and its impact on others. 2 years after the reunion, Jenny Martinez called me with an update. I thought you'd want to know, she said. Amanda reached out to me personally to apologize for keeping us apart. She didn't ask for forgiveness or make excuses. She just acknowledged what she'd done and said she was sorry. Jenny had received similar calls from several other classmates. Amanda was systematically contacting everyone she'd manipulated, taking responsibility for her actions without asking for anything in return. Are you going to forgive her? Jenny asked. I considered the question carefully. I'm glad she's getting help and making amends, I said finally. But forgiveness isn't something I owe her just because she's apologizing. Some actions have consequences that can't be undone. 3 years later, I was at a conference when I saw Amanda across the room. She looked different, less polished, more genuine. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod of acknowledgement but didn't approach me. After the conference, I found a brief note in my conference materials. Thank you for exposing my behavior that night. It was the wake-up call I needed to get help. I hope you're well. I kept the note, but I didn't respond. Some wounds need more time to heal, and some relationships can't be rebuilt no matter how much someone changes. But for the first time since that terrible reunion night, I didn't feel angry when I thought about Amanda. I felt something closer to peace. The peace that comes from knowing that my success was my own, that my friendships were real, and that I was strong enough to survive even the most calculated betrayal. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up giving us the greatest gifts. They show us exactly how strong we are when everything else is stripped away. Amanda's 20-year campaign to undermine me had failed because genuine talent, authentic relationships, and honest effort ultimately triumph over manipulation and deception. I was successful not because someone else failed, but because I'd earned it. And that knowledge was worth more than any reunion could have been.